Thanks for joining lesson 3, chapter 1. So, we are discussing infrastructure, and if it is something extremely critical infrastructure, is SSL endpoint. So, let's stay focused on the approach of this course is to give you key skills on how to evaluate an infrastructure. We went through all explanation on how you should make your own nodes, how you should understand the boundaries of infrastructure, how you should map potential lateral move, how you should understand the flow. We talk about the potential UML flow to visualize all step, but let's talk and zoom in into the SSL endpoint conversation. So we are having endpoint everywhere. SSL endpoint is everything is establishing an SSL handshake. In this example, I'm considering endpoint almost everything terminate the SSL handshake. It doesn't mean that actually that specific, for example, even if it's not established on the firewall, the SSL handshake because it's passing through to the load balancer behind, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an interface with a proxy listening from inside. And so the attack surface is made by everything is listening and everything is available for an attacker to be exploited. A proxy is actually the main component used almost everywhere within the infrastructure because it's capable to serve requests, load balancing requests, keep persistence of the request. So don't misunderstand the fact that is not an endpoint but is a single point. The CDN is, for example, a distributed design. The load balancer can be designed by a cluster or can be an HA kind. So you need to think also from an attacking perspective that private key that is within that box is actually repeated over and over across entire cluster. So it's important also to consider the session, SSL session persistence consideration, but let's move forward on fixing a concept. When you are talking about SSL endpoint, you suppose also you have a proxy module, and the proxy module is by the industry considered dead when actually is alive and kicking. And the main reason is it just changed terminology. Your CASB, your SASE, even your ADR is actually having a module that is a proxy on board. The reusage of NJX module within the industry is massive. And so is the reason why when there is some vulnerability there, it's just a snowball coming down. We talk about proxy, but it's obviously a main component of CDN, is part of the application proxy, but is capable also to do application routing. And we talk about that also in the service mesh, where is actually a key concept of a service mesh connectivity within a pass. So what I'm trying to highlight here is everybody talk about SSL and TLS inspection. Where you do it is extremely critical. Adding a control with a similar capability can increase the attack surface too. So the security of a network tap or whatever is the layer that actually is capable to inspect traffic is becoming a critical key point of your infrastructure. I take as example NJX, not because I have something against it, it's just the most common layer that you find in infrastructure, independently from which it is, even proprietary kind of stack is anyway having some sort of component. You can see the diagram here on the right hand side. In the same way you'll see a load balancer because actually it's the same. So it's having a front facing one SSL handshake, and to the backend can do SSL offload, or it can is capable to just use port 80 or for performance kind of reason. Obviously, end-to-end encryption is the most suggested, but that doesn't change because you still have an SSL handshake in front and an SSL handshake with the pool members behind. And so it means that the device itself, the NGIX itself class, can see the actual traffic. So I'm highlighting this one for a reason. It was historically exploited for big attack, and we are not giving the right attention to that because I hope you see it. But anyway, you have the slide on slide share, and so you can. So it was used in combination to serve malware. So you need to always consider also case history of compromise, and if there is one that is obviously highly important right now is actually that. So keep in mind how this layer is the most difficult to manage because it does have the key management, does have the reliability engineering perspective, it does have a potential sniffing point. It's obviously the key attention for an attacker. If you compromise that, you are in trouble, and most of the time you struggle to realize that. So not every attack is noisy, and that is a mistake that I see when I heard some conferences when it's not highlighted. You don't spot a security incident because you have an availability problem. You spot a DDoS because it's an availability problem. You spot other things, but you can have an environment perfectly running and compromised. So let's see other case study where it's actually was used extensively as a layer. And so let me remove my face again. So this case is an APT this time, but he used that to exploit and is behind and within the infrastructure. So from an infrastructure security consultant, I'm expecting this consideration to be on top of the list. So you saw that with this course, I take care to give you experience and not just repeating what you'll find. I could approach to this conversation of SSL endpoint, explain you tons of things that you already know. I didn't, for respect and for the fact that this one is not really basic course. Suppose that you have a minimum of understanding of how an infrastructure works, but don't forget that there are tons of other attacks that I don't mention. But SSL stripping is another thing on top of my mind. When it was discovered by Moxie, it started to get a lot of attention. So try to think about the big picture, how you do with the threat modeling, whatever approach you do use, and depends on what's your background and your target. But think about SSL endpoint in the various direction. Most of these load balancing environment are also having management interface access. So you need to consider that an attacker that exploits the kernel, especially in HA kind, because in a cluster you have a bit an higher layer of complexity, but you are in a box where you have potentially the capability to add also static root. So I take an example, and I hope it will not look like an attack of a vendor. I mean, everybody does have vulnerabilities, But if you take a really unlucky day where 4 vulnerabilities got spotted on F5, you realize how all these vulnerabilities were across multiple interfaces. For example, the control REST API is one of the most common to be used to push and commands to this layer. So you need also to think how critical is the automation of this layer, because they obviously scale, they serve a lot of requests, they need scalability. So what I'm trying to stress here is don't think about the SSL endpoint only as an SSL problem. You can have doesn't exist an attack that is not actually a gluing up various type of attack, and a vulnerability on a OS, on an API. Everything is valid. Doesn't matter what's the way how they make it and how they chain it, the attack. So what I'm suggesting is SSL certificates are seen as a critical conversation from a PKI perspective. But don't underestimate the fact that if your certificate management is sloppy and you let certificate to expire, you do have other kind of side effect as a wave to other function like incident response. And I take as a case study the one that is published here about the fact that a certificate got expired. The device that was supposed to do the inspection of that, due to the certificate, it didn't work. And so there was a layer that wasn't functioning as it was supposed to. Unfortunately, it's not an isolated case. Even the big one, if you see on the right hand, had a lot of problems. So don't think that it's not going to happen just because you have a solid PKI or you rely on Let's Encrypt or some sort of automation. You need also to have controls that automation works. That is quite critical. Now let's step back for a second. We talk about endpoint, I talk about the infrastructure, but right now everything is part of infrastructure, even an endpoint. Because at the time that I'm having an admin that is connecting through in somehow and doing a management activity, each box is actively part of infrastructure in the picture of a threat modeling. And right now, almost all security stack suppose that you have a client certificate. So in this conversation, I didn't stress on client certificate requirement that the key can identify the device, not the user. I suppose you know that stuff. I'm just saying that your agent that is connecting to some sort of cloud solution that tunnel you, that check your security of your box, that is actually working on the certificate. If something happened to that daemon and the SSL handshake is established with something else, you could up all entire endpoints. It's not any different whatever device we are talking about. And so man in the middle, it's not the only problem. You can hijack actual client and endpoint too. So SSL is on the top of your concern. It shouldn't be only about the SSL itself. I witness a lot of professional focusing on the hardening of the SSL. What is the SSL profile that you are using? One of the most common issue is you have all this load balancing infrastructure doesn't get tuned because it's a continuous work and the SSL profile has become sloppy. It's not just that. So stop to think about SSL only as SSL. Think about SSL as the main op where an attack could stay in, implant things, and redirect your traffic, sniffing your traffic, and for sure it will stay hidden. Don't expect an availability problem. A security incident is not always an availability problem. And so you need to have monitoring in place to not depend from third parties to tell you. So you need to have a proactive control that your certificates are managed properly, that your automation works, that your key import and export. Don't take me wrong, I don't want you to export key, but we know that for load balancing you have to. And so everything is quite complicated in this picture, especially the management interfaces attached to that, the capability to op around. Another thing that the industry is not stressing out, if you compromise a layer, you add a static route and you get around the management interface by passing firewalls. I never understood why all this is not stressed. At the time that you compromise an OS, you have full control on the routing and you can just reroute stuff. And obviously, whatever is in that management, if it's not properly segregated, properly authenticated, you have a lot of trouble. And all these devices are supposed to serve high load front-end traffic. So think about SSL, not just about SSL, about the full infrastructure picture. Who doesn't is generally going to have a lot of trouble. See all case study that I demonstrate, see how that layer is generally monitored from a reliability engineering perspective. And so till is up, the monitor is okay. It's not that, because if it's serving a redirect that is not proper, is redirecting your client to something else. And you don't have even SSL error certificates. Because as you remember in this easy peasy picture, here on that layer, you're doing also application routing. So even one line of policy can redirect your traffic without any understanding from a client perspective. So I hope you found it insightful. I spent my efforts to give you something juicy. Try to subscribe on YouTube. This course is for free, but if you subscribe, you'll get notified whatever lesson is coming out. You have all these slides on SlideShare in the description down below in the video, and I wish you all the best.